Is it okay? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Haider Sahab. So, we are meeting after a long time. In the meantime, we have seen very difficult days. And I hope and pray all is well with you. So, just let me know what all we discussed in the last class. I think we have to do ancient and medieval parts of your syllabus, mainly important for preliminary exam, but also important for mains because it provides a wider context in which we have to appreciate cultural developments which are particularly important for mains. So in the previous 5 classes, so far as I recall, I think we have discussed till the rise of the Magad as an imperial power. And that is part of post-Vedic age, in which we also discussed second urbanization, its general factors, their implications, that is implications of the second urbanization in the social life, in the ideological life, that is mainly related to the rise of new social classes, rise of new urban centers, and also the rise of new ideas, and some of those ideas concretizing in form of heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jainism, but that is not part of those topics. Buddhism and Jainism are part of cultural dimensions, so we don't have to discuss them as part of ancient and medieval classes. Then we proceeded to discuss the Mahajanpadas, political developments. In continuity from the later Vedic age, when we find conversion of Janas into Janpadas, and then larger political formations in form of Mahajanpadas, 16 Mahajanpadas in their details in terms of their location and also in terms of some important personalities. I think I provided you with some class notes. Then the last topic I think was the rise of Magad, the role of circumstances and the role of individuals. While discussing the role of circumstances, we talked about the role of geographical location having or providing some strategic or economic advantages to the rulers of Magad, and then a relatively liberal socio-cultural climate, because those areas were not the mainland of Brahmanical religion. So social rigidities, complexities which are generally associated with later Vedic Brahmanism were not that much well entrenched in those areas. So we have a relatively liberal socio-cultural climate in which we have promotion of talent, and we have Shudra rulers belonging to the Nanda dynasty being the real founders of the Magadhan Empire. And then we also, I think I made a chart on the board in which some important dynasties like Hareka dynasty, Shishunaga dynasty, Nanda dynasty, and some important rulers belonging to those dynasties we discussed. So is it okay with everyone? Are you in a position to recall all those things? If you have any difficulty related to whatever we have discussed, I think this is the time you can ask, and we can spend 5 to 10 minutes. And this is also important for establishing the missing linkages, because we are meeting after a long time. So I can wait for your responses for a brief period of time, particularly in terms of your doubts, your problems related to the previous 5 classes, not only the last class, but related to everything that we have discussed, with an intention to establish linkages in the context of the long gap that we have had due to obvious reasons. So anyone from your side having any difficulty, I request the coordinator to please let me know if things are clear, if you are getting responses, so that we can proceed further. Rohit Nandan is saying, not much, sir. Not much, a very vague kind of expression. It means there are difficulties, but not much. You can manage on your own. No? Is this the situation? Meenakshi Yadav, we can proceed, sir. Ispit Pandey, clear, sir. Okay. So now let us proceed to talk about a phase of Indian history that is एक कप चाय पिला दो बाबू, ठीक है? That is called the age of Mauryas. You must have heard of this very famous dynasty. When we talk about ancient history, at least 2 dynasties automatically come to our minds: the Guptas and the Mauryas. Guptas much later on. But if you talk about the first famous dynasty, imperial dynasty, during whose reign we find the climax of ancient Indian political developments, and also ancient Indian imperial experiments, institutional developments, ideological developments, institutional developments in terms of bureaucracy, ideological developments in terms of alternative ideas related to royalty, related to estate formation in form of the Dhamma of Ashoka. You must have heard of this famous ruler of ancient Indian history. Nikhil is saying, sir, no doubt from the student side. Please continue. Okay, we are going to continue. So let us first find out, as we have been doing elsewhere also, what are the important topics, or what are the important subtopics rather, related to this age, which in Indian history is called the age of the Mauryas. The age of the Mauryas. You must have heard of some very famous rulers like Chandragupta Maurya and his legendary association with his mentor Chanakya, then his son Bindusar. This Bindusar should not be confused with Bimbisara of the Haryaka dynasty. And then Ashoka, three major rulers we can say belonging to this dynasty. Out of these three, two are particularly important. Chandragupta Maurya is the founder of this empire and imperial system, and Ashoka for two reasons mainly: giving a new orientation to the state and its policies, both internal and external, and also for being responsible to some extent for the decline of the empire and the imperial system. And then after Ashoka, of course, we have many rulers. Even after the death of Ashoka, the dynasty continued for around 40 to 50 years. Till its last ruler, Brihadrath, was killed by his own prime minister or commander-in-chief, we can say, Pushyamitra Shunga, who became founder of a new dynasty known as the Shunga dynasty, one of post-Mauryan dynasties. But these later rulers are not that much important, because they generally presided over declining processes, and their incapacity to control the decline of the empire or the declining processes associated with the empire make them particularly insignificant. Now, chronologically, when we talk about this age in Indian history, we roughly take this to be this century, that is from 300 BC or BCE to around 200 BCE or BC. Though Mauryas had started ruling a little earlier than 300, we can say 324 is generally supposed to be the coronation of Chandragupta Maurya, and the dynasty continued till 187. But as a Mauryan century, we identify a period that is called 300 to 200. This century can be identified as the century of Mauryas in Indian history. Now, this phase of Indian history is particularly known for its political developments, particularly in terms of empire building, particularly in terms of providing new bases or new ideological foundations for imperial experiments. If we talk about the economic development, we have nothing but continuation of the process of urbanization, further spread of the urbanization along with further spread of polities. That is, now even in remote areas we have political formations, and they became part of what we can say the Mauryan imperial experiments. Cultural developments are not part of ancient and medieval classes, so we can ignore them here. So one way, and that is very popular way, though not very useful way, of covering this phase of Indian history is to talk about the dynasty and to talk about the rulers of this dynasty. The way we have the rulers of Nanda dynasty, Shishunaga dynasty or Haryanka dynasty before the Mauryas, and some of their achievements. So we can have as topics Chandragupta Maurya as a topic, Ashoka as a topic, Bindusara as a topic, or particularly the first and the last, Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, and we can discuss their contributions. But I think this is the old way of doing things. Of course, it's still important for state services, but UPSC, we all know, is known for its experiments, known for asking questions which are generally perceived as out of box. At times, questions of even extraordinary degrees of difficulties are asked. So, in the light of the level of preparation that is required for this exam, Otherwise, we study history for so many other purposes also. Even in one-day competition, history is very popular subject. In SSC, in banking, in railways, in state services, everywhere. And the basic details are the same. But then, if we talk about this exam, that is UPSC, which is known as one of the toughest exam in the whole world, of course, the level of our understanding is going to be somewhat different. So I think we should follow some different approaches while discussing the age of the Mauryas. Here, while talking about this period, as we have been doing elsewhere, let us make our plan first, and then according to that plan, we can proceed. So the first important here is aspect which I think we should cover: sources for the reconstruction of the history of the Mauryas. Sources are important. Generally in authentic textbooks, we have references to sources also. But in answer writing in mains, we are not supposed to be so precise as to provide resources or sources everywhere or to quote sources everywhere. General understanding will be sufficient. But for PT purpose, I think they can ask you these kind of questions. Which of the following is associated or not associated with the age of the Mauryas? Or which of the following is known for or is an important source for the reconstruction of the age of the Mauryas? Or the Mauryan history is reconstructed on the basis of which of the following? These kind of questions may be asked. So here we are not going to avoid the sources for the reconstruction of the age of the Mauryas. And as we know that historical reconstruction relies upon both archaeological sources and the literary sources. So here also we have to talk about archaeological sources and also of the literary sources. At times as part of literary sources, or at times also as a separate category, we also talk about foreign. Keep on checking the spellings. If there is any spelling mistake, just do let me know. Foreign accounts. Foreign accounts have served very useful purposes for the reconstruction of ancient Indian history. And at times we have direct questions in cultural segment also. Those of you who are familiar with the previous years' questions must be knowing that in one particular year, I think 2 or 3 years back, they have asked questions related to Chinese and Arab travelers and what they all have to say about the Indian culture, about the Indian society. So see, this segment is important in cultural aspect, that is important for mains, but we cannot avoid this. Is it okay? And when we talk about foreign accounts of Indian history, the oldest accounts are associated with the Greco-Roman people. You must have heard of Alexander the Great and his invasion of India around 327 BC, and some geographers, some historians who accompanied him on his expedition to India have written about Indian society, about Indian people, about the details of his expeditions. And since the date of this expedition is well established, this has also helped us in establishing the chronology of Indian history. 327 or 326 BC, that was the time when Alexander invaded India and came up to the river Bias or Beas. But due to the refusal of his soldiers or due to some apprehensions on their part regarding the might of the Nanda rulers, they could not cross the river and Alexander was forced by his soldiers to go back. On the way back to his home, he died also. So This Greek and Roman contacts continued, and the first important observer of the Indian history, of the Indian culture is Megasthenes. You must have heard of this man and his famous work called Indica. So we cannot leave Indica, we cannot leave Megasthenes. So we have to add foreign accounts, particularly Indica. Is it okay? After sources related to the history of the Mauryas, we can talk about the Mauryan administration. The Maurya administration. Some facts and details related to them or related to it. The way UPSC is asking questions nowadays, I think this is the most important dimension. This dimension is also important, but nowadays this is more important for state services. Rather, we can say Mauryan polity and the nature of Mauryan polity, Maurya administration, some important departments. No? There also we see something very innovative, very new in Indian history. When we compare this phase with the previous phases of Indian history, then the third dimension, which is the conventional one, that we can talk about the rulers. We can talk about the rulers. We have many rulers, but as I told you, three are particularly important for us. But what you are going to realize is that while talking about sources, while talking about archaeological sources, literary sources, foreign accounts, most of the time we would be also talking about the administration, we would be also talking about the rulers. So it is approaching the age of the Mauryas through sources. No, this is the approach. This is the difference with this approach, in this approach and the previous approach in which we have biographical details of the rulers. And then we can also talk about the decline of the empire. Since this is the first imperial formation of the subcontinent, its decline is going to be a very important chapter of Indian history. So these are the major areas we have to talk about while talking about the age of the Mauryas, chronologically, the Indian history from 300 BC to 200 BC, sources, archaeological, literary, foreign accounts, then Mauryan polity or political life we can say. And as we have discussed earlier, that in political life we generally talk about politics, we talk about polity, that is a state and its organs, and then we also talk about administration, and then rulers, if any details related to them missing, and then finally the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Is this position clear to all of you? Any doubt, any confusion related to this phase of Indian history? Or if anything that you want to add, anything you think to be not that much important, I just expect your opinion. If you want me to include anything that you think is important, I can include here in this, or this, so far as my understanding is concerned, will be sufficient in the normal circumstances. Of course, for extraordinary situation, we have to rely upon extraordinary readings, chance readings, and also to some extent luck, which is at times play a very important role. But it is generally advisable that we should not prepare for the questions of extraordinary degrees of difficulty because they are not available in the public domain. So you just have to be a little above average. Is it okay for a balanced preparation? And the questions of relative advantages can simply be ignored. So anything from your side? Is this clear to all of you? Okay, so now let us proceed further. You are always free to share your doubts, your opinions. Now, see, when we talk about archaeological sources, we generally talk about material findings. We also talk about, or we can talk about some important sites which are generally associated with the age of the Mauryas. The way we have Indus sites, archaeological sites, in the same way we can have Mauryan archaeological sites, some material findings. Then out of these material findings, we particularly pay attention to coins. Mauryan Empire is developing in the overall context of what we can say the urbanization, and urbanization is associated with economic progress and development. And one important aspect of economic progress and development is monetization. So I think you remember punch-marked coins. Some of those punch-marked coins, usually made of silver, but at times also made of copper, are also associated with the age of the Mauryas, and this branch of study, historical studies, is called numismatics. The way they are asking questions, they can ask a general question related to the role of numismatics or the coins in the reconstruction of India's past. If they can ask questions related to foreign accounts, they can also ask you questions related to numismatics. So what I am trying to impress upon you is that apparently these topics are important for PT and we are covering them for PT, but don't forget that they can be important also in mains in the cultural dimension, the way they are asking questions. And that's why I told you that it is very difficult to separate the history part, so-called history part, from the culture, because today by definition we understand that history is nothing but a study of cultural developments. Then you must have heard of something that we call inscriptions. This itself can be a question, that their study is called epigraphy or epigraphical studies. So for the first time we have, this itself can be a PT question, that inscriptional sources throw light on which phase of Indian history. So we do find some specimens of the art of writing in ancient Indus Valley civilization, but due to the lack of decipherment of the Indus script, we can't say that the history of the Indus Valley civilization has been reconstructed on the basis of inscriptional sources to any extent. Inscriptional sources are for the first time important when we reach the age of the Mauryas. And we have many inscriptions, but particularly important here are the inscriptions of Ashokas, Ashokan edicts, which are basically inscriptions, but due to their association with royalty and state affairs, we also call them edicts because they are royal dictates or injunctions subjects were supposed to obey or subjects were supposed to follow. So, thank you. Now, when we talk about the literary sources, here in case of literary sources, we generally divide literary sources into religious literature and secular literature. Now, if we talk about the religious atmosphere of the time, we have the so-called Brahmanism, we have Buddhism, we have Jainism and other heterodox sects. So here in the religious literature, we can talk about Hindu religious literature, and here we have the Puranas. Puranas are very important in the reconstruction of ancient Indian political history, despite all their limitations. We don't have definite chronological frame. We generally find use of future tense. We have problems of interpolation. We have the problems of exaggeration. But in cultural section, in literature part, you will study Puranas. And there also you will study how important the Puranas are for the reconstruction of the ancient Indian political history. We have Vansaulis of not only sages but also of the rulers. At least till around Gupta age, we have Puranas being very important. Then we have the Buddhist religious literature. Here also we have so many things about the Mauryas, though the main hero here is Ashoka. For obvious reasons, we all understand. He was follower of Buddhism, champion of Buddhism, promoter of Buddhism. So he has been a very celebrated figure in Buddhist literary traditions. And then we have Jaina religious literature. Here also we have something about the Mauryas. Then when we talk about the secular literature, so when we have the rise of Mauryan Empire in the north, around the same time or a little later, we have the Sangam literature in the extreme south. So this itself can be a question, whether Mauryas are mentioned in the Sangam literature or not. So let me tell you that they have been mentioned in the Sangam literature. Then here we have a very famous grammarian, you must be knowing, Patanjali, who lived in the time of Pushyamitra Shunga and known for his Mahabhashya, which is basically a commentary on the Ashtadhyayi of Panini, the first Sanskrit grammarian who is supposed to have lived in the 4th century BC. So here we have Mahabhashya also making some references to the Mauryas, particularly of Chandragupta Maurya, though it does not mention Chanakya, but it does mention a Chandragupta Maurya. Then you must have heard of something Mudra Rakshas. Mudra Rakshasa. Mudra Rakshas. This was by Bishak Dutt, a very famous work. Here also we have something about the Mauryas. And then finally we have the most famous Arth Shastra attributed to or ascribed to the legendary Chanakya. Arth Shastra. Then in the category of foreign accounts, we particularly have Indica of Megasthenes. Now, even on the basis of your common sense and your exposure to the previous year's question papers, you can easily understand that the way they are asking questions nowadays, these things are more important than the biographical details of the Mauryan rulers, their political or military achievements, or the aspects of administration. And here let me specify that we can have some concrete topics here which are important also for mains, like Ashokan edicts. I am encircling this. This can be important also in mains in cultural section. Because when we talk about Indian culture, when we talk about Indian civilization, when we talk about Indian cultural values, Indian civilizational values, Indian cultural and civilizational heritage, do you think we can ignore rulers like Ashoka and his policy of Dhamma? We can never ignore this. Is it okay? So I think here a detailed discussion is required on the Ashokan edicts, not in terms of their number or their classification, but in terms of the content, because they are the most authentic source for the knowledge of what we can say the age of the Mauryas, though not very comprehensive, but is still capturing significant aspects of the Mauryan administration. Here Ashokan edicts, very important for us. And here Arth Shastra is going to be important not only for PT but also for mains in the cultural section, for obvious reasons. And if we talk about economic aspects of the Arth Shastra, if we talk about political aspects of the Arth Shastra, socio-cultural aspects of the Arth Shastra, basically we are talking about the time of the Mauryas, age of the Mauryas. We precisely don't know because our sources are limited. But whatever we find in the Arth Shastra, we have a tendency on the part of the historians to relate them to the age of the Mauryas. And likewise, this encircled one, Indica, is also going to be important not only for PT but also for mains. Is it okay? In the cultural section. Is this position clear to all of you? Any doubt, any confusion? That is capturing the broader contours of this topic, the age of the Mauryas, this way. For the time being, let us forget about the Mauryan administration or the Mauryan polity. Let us also forget about the rulers. Let us also forget about the decline of the Mauryas. We can have a brief discussion on what we can say these topics one by one in the usual format of both dictation and discussion. So discussion part is now over. We are going to write something, dictation part, and difficult words are already written on the board. Let me know if there is any difficulty till now. Any doubt? Any confusion? And I have something to share with you also. So I request the coordinator to please share your number. If you have my number, I will be forwarding you something which we are supposed to share with the students. And I think you all are familiar with this class notes method, that certain details we discuss in the class but don't dictate, and details are provided in form of a class notes. So please give me your number. I am forwarding you and you do the same, and request the technical team to share these class notes on the portal so that we can make passing references. Am I audible to all of you? Am I visible to all of you? Okay, you keep on doing these things in the process. Meanwhile, make a list of archaeological sites associated with the age of the Mauryas. Nowadays, they are asking questions related to the sites also. So, before we write the concrete sites, write some introductory kind of thing, and write at the history. The history of the Maurya dynasty has been reconstructed on the basis of both archaeological and literary sources, and in the process we have been benefited also by the accounts. We have been benefited also by the accounts given by some foreign observers, given by some foreign observers, some foreign observers. This is what we can say, introductory kind of thing. Then write some important archaeological sites, some important archaeological sites associated with some important archaeological sites which are excavated in general, some important archaeological sites associated with the Mauryas, associated with the Mauryas, associated with the Mauryas are mentioned below, are mentioned below. Right? You must have heard of this place, Takshashila. Chanakya is supposed to be a resident of this city. Mauryas had very strong connection with northwestern parts of the Indian subcontinent, and We have some historians who say that Chandragupta Maurya started his career in those areas only and gradually proceeded towards the east and other directions in the Indian subcontinent to establish his empire. Is it okay? So, Takshashila, this is an important site, excavated also. Then, right second, Roper. In some books also written like this, Rooper. This is in Punjab. And if you remember, this is also a site associated with the age of the Indus Valley civilization, Rooper. Then we have next important site, Mauryan site is, that is, we can say, Purana Kila. These are all excavated sites, though not well excavated, but still excavated. Purana Kila. Purana Kila, the same Purana Kila we know, situated in Delhi. Then D. Mathura. Mathura. Is it okay? There is a place called Mat, M-A-T, near Mathura. That is a village basically that has been excavated. And there we have this Mauryan site. Then write this site, B-H-I-T-A, Bhita. Bhita is in UP, Western UP. Bhita. Nowadays sites are becoming important. That's why I'm including them. Then there is a site which is also PGW site. That is Ataranji Khera. Ataranji or Khera. You must have heard of district Itawa or Eta district. There we have this archaeological site Ataranji Khera, and it has also produced a very rich layer of what we can say the Mauryan period. Next site is Shravasti. Shravasti, no, today identified with Sahet Mahet. This is in eastern UP, the same place with which we have association of Buddha. Buddha is supposed to have lived maximum years of his life in this city only, Shravasti. The city remained a vibrant city also in the age of the Mauryas, and in archaeological excavations we find a very rich Mauryan layer at this site, Shravasti. Then Vaishali. 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 For the time being, I am erasing this. We are talking about this aspect, that is sites. Vaishali. Then you must have heard of modern Patna, capital of Bihar, and ancient Patliputra, mentioned as Palibothra by the Greek observers. In that city, we have many sites. I'm not going to write the name of the city, but I'm going to write the specific locations because this is very important. You must have heard of Kumrahar or Kumrar. Now this site is particularly important because here we find remains of Mauryan palace. Mauryan palace, Maurya palace. You know, some pillars, some remains of the legendary Mauryan palace mentioned by Megasthenes and also mentioned by Fahian. We have discovered at a place called Kumrahar, and Kumrahar is now a suburb of modern Patna. J, that is next one is Bulandi Bagh. Bulandi Bagh. This is also situated inside Patna, and here we have discovered remains of wooden wall. In Mauryan architecture, you will study that Mauryan architecture was largely wooden architecture. Remains of wooden wall, or what we can say Palisade, palisade. No, that is a defensive feature. Bulandi Bagh. Then the next one is Didarganj. This is also in Patna. Didarganj. Now here at Didarganj, we have discovered an idol of Yakshini. Yakshas, Yakshinis you must have heard of, supposed to be mythical creatures. So we have an idol of Yakshini, which is world famous and preserved in Patna Museum. This is also called what we can say, this idol of Yakshini, Chamar Grahini or Chamar Dharini. So this itself can be an important, at which site we find the idol of Yakshini or Chamar Grahini, or Chamar Grahini is attributed to or associated with which of the following age of Indian history. So we have Didarganj. Then we have some more sites which are important. I'm not talking about the Mauryan pillars or the Mauryan sites of rock edicts or major or minor ones. I'm talking about the sites where we have properly conducted archaeological excavations. Is it okay? Then here, Sohgaura, there is a place, Sohgaura, that is in UP. Mahasthan, that is in Bangladesh, modern Bangladesh. I think last to last year there was a question on Sohgaura also. It was given as part of the options. Then Sopara. Sopara was a port city near modern Mumbai. Sopara. In the time of Mauryas, we do find flourishing trade and commerce, including foreign trade. Next one is Bharuch or Bharukaksh. And then in the south, we have many sites. Ujjaini. Ujjaini was basically one of the administrative headquarters of the Mauryas. The modern Ujjain. Ashoka had been appointed as provincial administrator of this site. Further south, in the Karnataka region, we have a site called Sannati. We have many others also, but these are the more important ones. And these are the sites which are suggestive not only of the history of the time of the Mauryas, but also of the expansion of urbanization. The process of urbanization which had started a little earlier, that is around 6th century BC. What we find is that even under the Mauryas, the process of urbanization continued. And we have urbanization now in the new areas, that is the areas beyond the middle Gangetic basin. And all these sites which we have referred to here on the board, they are also sites associated with the second urbanization, particularly during the time of the Mauryas. So we should have a general idea about the Mauryan sites, they can make these sites part of the options given to you. Which of the following is an Indus site? Which of the following is a Mauryan site? Which of the following is a site associated with the second urbanization? I hope you understand. These kind of questions are possible, and that's why we have written these many sites. No need to mug them up, by heart. Just expose yourself to these sites and just stay familiar with them. Is it okay? Is there any problem related to the sites? Now you change your paragraph, and after changing this paragraph, we are going to talk about the material findings, that what specific objects discovered in archaeological excavations which are generally associated with the age of the Mauryas. Is it okay? So after making a list of these topics, these sites, just change your paragraph and write. Right? Since the Mauryan dynasty and the Mauryan polity, since the Mauryan dynasty or the Mauryan polity had a wider context of the expansion of urbanization, wider context of the expansion of urbanization, wider context of the expansion of urbanization, wider context of the expansion of urbanization. The above mentioned sites also indicate the process of the expansion of urbanization, even beyond the areas of the Gangetic Basin, even beyond the areas of the Gangetic Basin, even beyond the areas of the Gangetic Basin. In general, the following material elements, or material findings, the following material elements or the material findings serve as the cultural markers, markers, I hope understand the meaning of this term, cultural markers of the age of the Mauryas, cultural markers of the age of the Mauryas. Write the first one. Before you write the first one, let me remind you of something. I shared with you a class notes while covering the topic of second urbanization, and that was associated with the material elements associated with the second urbanization. And since we know now that the time of Mauryas is not beyond the time of second urbanization, so some of those elements which are associated with second urbanization are also associated with what we can say the time of the Mauryas specifically. And there also in that class notes, I have made an attempt to specify those material elements, those material remains which are specifically associated with the time of the Mauryas. So here we can make a passing reference to that class notes. I don't exactly remember its number now. But here in bracket you can write, kindly refer to the class notes on material elements of urbanization. We are going to write about them, but just for elaboration, you can, for your own convenience, you can write here in bracket. Okay, for details, kindly refer to the class notes on material elements of the second urbanization. Class notes on the material elements of the second urbanization. I am going to specify them here further. So write here the first one now. Have you ever heard of NBPW? Northern Black Polished Ware. Meanwhile, I'm a little disheartened for the obvious reason that I received no response from you people, whether things are clear or not. Perhaps I have got the number of the academic coordinator. Is it 9910120437? Please respond a little fast. Just text me, or my number is 9910917560. So that I could share the notes in advance for making references. Okay. Meanwhile, I have some queries here. Jay Dev is asking something. Okay, sir, what are these concepts of wares, like painted grey ware, etc.? I think in the very first class we discussed some processes related to archaeological excavations, like exploration, excavations, and also that archaeology is a study of material remains or physical remains of the past societies. I hope you remember. Is it okay? Now, in exploration, digging is not done, and in excavation, digging is done, and we find material things like stone tools, like pottery, and anything that can be used by historians for reconstructing the cultural traits of the time. Now it is in this context we discover wares. That is what? Pottery basically. Pottery. Is it clear, Jayadev? Pottery. And how the issue of nomenclature of historical cultures is settled. On that issue also we had some discussion. That at times the type sites are used for determining the nomenclature. Type sites are the sites where material remains are found for the first time, related to any culture, related to any civilization. For example, Harappa is the type site of the civilization that we discovered in the northwestern parts of the Indian subcontinent. And so, the civilization became famous as the Harappan civilization. So civilizations and cultures are named after the type sites. That is one way. Another way is the use of the name of the entire region, like the Indus Basin. But still another way is to find out the most distinguished object, and based on their physical characteristics. Is it okay? For example, megalith, that is what? Big stones. Mega is big, lith is a stone. So likewise, we have some pottery discovered in the different layers of archaeological excavations, like BRW, we call them black and red ware, associated with the megalithic people. Is it okay? Then we have what? The red pottery. Sorry, this BRW again, that is black on red. Black on red pottery. This is black and red. No? This is associated with the megalithic people of the south. This is black on red is associated with the Indus people. So all those sites where we find this pottery, which is named as BRW, that is red color with black painting. It is something like this. These are physical characteristics. And on that basis we have this kind of abbreviations or acronyms. Is it okay? Then beyond Indus, we have others. Is it okay? For example, when we talk about OCP, ochre colored pottery, we don't know about the people, but if you remember, while talking about the Vedic age, we talked about OCP cultural sites, at times associated with Rig Vedic people, but again this is very doubtful proposition. Then PGW, painted grey ware. And these sites have produced even iron tools. I hope you remember the later Vedic civilization. So this is associated with what? Later Vedic. And then we have what? NBPW. I hope now you are reminded of it. That is northern black polished ware. This is generally associated with the second urbanization. In second urbanization we have much variety, so we have other traditions also. But we do have NBPW. I hope this issue is clear, Jaidev. Then Rava Harshita Sivani. Sir, what are PGW sites? I hope this issue of Sivani is also handled here. These are archaeological sites producing a specific kind of pottery termed by historians or archaeologists as PGW, that is painted grey ware. Ware is Bartan. Is it okay? Software, hardware, I hope you understand this. So it is painted grey, of grey color, painted, and so painted grey ware, and generally associated with the later Vedic people. So wherever we have found this kind of pottery, we consider those sites associated with the later Vedic people, or even if it is contentious, at least we can distinguish these people, that is the users of PGW, from the users of what we can say NBPW. It is something like this. So these issues are addressed, and I have just given you the first element here. We are going back to the dictation part. Meanwhile, I have got the number. Yes, Ruchi, I have your email now. So I'll be sharing things now in break. Is it okay? I am relieved now that I have something. Meanwhile, if there is any problem, any confusion. So NBPW, Northern Black Polished Ware. Again, like PGW, it is a kind of pottery discovered mainly from northern areas. Color is black, it is polished, and so called Northern Black Polished Ware. So we have many layers here. Some layers, particularly the middle and upper layers of NBPW. When I talk about layers, I am basically talking about a stratigraphical method which is used in archaeological studies. If you remember the very first class, that is different stratas or layers are exposed in archaeological excavations. That is called stratigraphical studies. So NBPW is generally associated with the second urbanization, but also associated with the Mauryan age or the Mauryan time. Now second important is iron objects. Iron tools and objects have been discovered in plenty from NBPW cultural sites. They have been discovered also from PGW cultural sites which are earlier than NBPW, but those tools are generally associated with non-agricultural activities. And that's why we say that widespread use of iron as a new metal in agriculture started when we have the NBPW, and the beginning of NBPW is around 6th century BC. If you revise the old notes, all these things you will be able to connect. Is it okay? So iron objects are associated also with the time of the Mauryas, and they are found in association with NBPW cultural sites. Then third, BURNT, burnt bricks. Let me tell you that I have specified there also in those class notes in which I shared with you the material elements of the second urbanization, that burnt bricks after a long gap came to be used in India under the Mauryas or in the time of the Mauryas. So after Indus Valley civilization, we have a long gap in use of burnt bricks, and the earliest use of burnt bricks in the Gangetic basin is associated with the time of the Mauryas. Is it okay? Then you must have heard of terracotta figurines. Terracotta continues to be important, and they are important even in case of the time of the Mauryas. Terracotta figurines. Then we can also talk about, you must have heard of ring whales or ringed whales. These are used as soakage peats, ringed whales. Ringed whales. Then here we can also talk about architectural remains also, like the Mauryan pillars, wherever we have discovered them. They are also part of the material elements associated with the age of the Mauryas. We have Mauryan caves, particularly in Barabar and Nagarjuni hills. These are the earliest caves of the Indian subcontinent, marking the beginning of architecture in India. These topics you will study in detail as part of culture. Their architecture is a topic. Here we are not covering architecture, but at least we can include Mauryan pillars and Mauryan caves also as part of the material elements associated with the time of the Mauryas. And why only this? We have one more. That is what? Punch-marked coins. Like NBPW, first used in pre-Maurya days around 6th century BC, but the use continued even under the Mauryas. Likewise, punch-marked coins, first use when we have the beginning of second urbanization around 6th century BC, but even under the Mauryas we have the use of punch-marked coins. We are not in a position to specifically attribute them to any of the Mauryan rulers issuing them, because we lack legends, nothing is inscribed. But we do find some symbols on them which are associated with the Mauryas, and that's why some historians believe that if not all, some of the punch-marked coins were also associated with the time of the Mauryas, maybe also associated with the Maurya dynasty, because in the Arth Shastra, we have talked about cash realization or appropriation of revenue. We have talked about cash payment to the bureaucracy, panas, is it okay, and mashakas. All these things have been mentioned in the Arth Shastra. So it seems that Mauryan economy had a rich, what we can say, content of monetization, and that monetization was facilitated by punch marked coins, and some of them, for example, with symbols like peacock, symbols like heels, symbols like trees in rings, maybe some Buddhist influence, trees in rings, peacock, heels, crescent. Please check the spelling if it is correct or not. Crescent. So those punch marked coins on which we have peacock symbol, heels, trees in rings, crescent, they are generally associated with the time of the Mauryas. Is this position clear to all of you? So these are some important material elements which can be associated with the I have some responses here. I don't know. Jaydev Pathak seems to be a little irritated. That whole class is going to be spoiled without connection. Almost half done. What kind of connection? Connection with the previous topics or some networking kind of thing? Some technical error I am not able to find out. If you are worried about the connection with the previous topics, I request you to please revise the notes. All connections would be automatically established. And even if not established, then I am there always, all the time. I have shared my number also with you. So no need to feel irritated. We are here to solve your problems, intellectual problems or technical problems. But I'm not sure about the nature of problem that you are facing. Okay, someone is saying technical glitches, sir. Jaydev is also saying connection with sir. Connection, okay, connection with me. I have made public appearance after a long time, so I am much eager to have connection with you people. And I keep on requesting you to say something, to give some feedback, to ask something. So whatever is happening, this is happening despite my earnest desire to have connection with you. So here I hope I can be forgiven for this. But even if it is technical problem, don't worry. Those parts which are missing, you can contact me on my number also. I will be helping you. What I can do. Not in the class, after the class. If you find anything which you are not able to resolve on your own. So, is this okay with everyone? So till now we have discussed, we have started with the sources. We are talking about archaeological sources. In archaeological sources, we talk about the sites, we have just talked about the material elements, and here we have also included coins. That some of them are associated with what we can say the Mauryas, and these are the earliest coins known as punch marked or coins. Is it okay? So this is also covered now. So here in archaeological section, now we are left with inscriptions or epigraphy, and here particularly with Ashokan edicts. And these edicts require, as I told you, a very comprehensive kind of treatment to be useful not only for PT but also for mains in the cultural segment. But before we talk about these inscriptions and their general significance, let us have a break, and in the meantime I will also be doing some coordination work so that your problems can be resolved or solved. Is it okay? Meanwhile, sir, response portal is working fine. Please carry on with the class. If any issue, we will inform. Kindly ignore portal. Okay. Sir, response portal is okay. Okay. So let us have a break for 5 minutes as usual, and after that we are going to continue with the remaining topics. So, welcome back, and now let us talk about these inscriptions which are part of Indian epigraphy. Epigraphy is nothing but a study of inscriptions, and when we talk about the Mauryan inscriptions, we have the Ashokan edicts. Is it okay? Now, the general details of the Ashokan edicts in terms of their number, in terms of the content, I am going to share with you in form of class notes. I have already shared it with concerned team that will be available to you very soon. Here in this class, we are going to talk about something else, some other details about the inscriptions. As I told you that these inscriptions are relatively more important, so we can have a separate heading, make a separate heading, write Ashokan edicts, and then continue write something. After making a separate heading for Ashokan edicts, please continue now a little bit dictation about them. At the Ashokan edicts, the Ashokan edicts, the Ashokan edicts provide rich inscriptional materials for the reconstruction of the history, reconstruction of the history of the age of the Mauryas, reconstruction of the history of the age of the Mauryas. They are the oldest, they are the oldest, they are the oldest deciphered, D-E-C-I-P-H-E-R-E-D, they are the oldest deciphered inscriptions. They are the oldest deciphered inscriptions of the Indian subcontinent, first deciphered by the famous Orientalist, those people who took interest in Indian culture, known as Orientalist, by the famous Orientalist James Prinsep, the famous Orientalist James Prinsep, in 1837. In 1837. They are found mostly in the Prakrit language. They are found mostly in the Prakrit language, which was the language of the masses at that time, which was the language of the masses at that time, indicating that they were meant for the common people, This intention is also established On the basis of this intention is also established on the basis of the use of on the basis of the use of some foreign languages, some foreign languages like Aramaic and Greek, some foreign languages like Aramaic and Greek. In the northwestern parts of the Indian subcontinent, in the northwestern parts of the Indian subcontinent, known for the presence of some foreign people, ever since the days of the invasion of Alexander. The invasion of Alexander. You must have heard of this man, Alexander, in bracket right, 327-26 BC. The days of Alexander. They are mostly in Brahmi script. So James Prinsep had deciphered nothing but Brahmi script. They are mostly in Brahmi script. But in some parts, particularly in the northwestern parts, but in some parts, particularly in the northwestern parts, we find use of some other scripts as well. We find use of some other scripts as well, like Kharoshthi, Aramaic and Greek. Kharoshthi, Aramaic and Greek. In those areas, that is northwestern areas, in those areas, we also find use of bilingual, that is Prakrit as well as Greek or Aramaic. Use of bilingual edicts, EDICTS, use of bilingual edicts. The use of different languages and scripts. The use of different languages and scripts in the Ashokan edicts, in the Ashokan edicts reflect the prevailing cultural diversity or diversities, the prevailing cultural diversities in the Mauryan Empire, the prevailing cultural diversities in the Mauryan Empire or in the Maurya Empire. Stop here. I hope you understand this. How many languages used? 3. Prakrit, Aramaic and Greek. Prakrit is the main. How many scripts used? 4. Brahmi is the main. And we also find bilingual edicts in northwestern areas. In those areas we also find Kharoshthi, Aramaic and Greek. It means Prakrit is a language, Aramaic is language as well as script, Greek is also a language as well as script, or Kharoshthi is only script. Script is something which we write, language is something that we speak. So I hope you understand the differences between the Two, a particular language can be written in so many different scripts. Is it okay? And what is being reflected? Cultural diversity. Nowadays they are asking a statement based questions also. They can give you some statements related to the Ashokan edicts, and they can ask you which of the following statement or statements is correct or incorrect. Is it okay? And the first person who deciphered the Brahmi script and by implication also deciphered the Ashokan edicts was an Orientalist, James Prinsep. Orientalists were those people who took interest in the study of Oriental cultures, that is the Eastern cultures, which are generally contrasted with the Occidental or the Western cultures. This paragraph is clear to all of you? Now change it and write few more lines. And in the following paragraph, we are going to talk about the significance, not significance, but the nature of the Ashokan edicts, that how these edicts are perceived. Is it okay? And there also we can have some statements, and we can have full question also in what we can say cultural segment. So change your paragraph and write. The Ashokan edicts are supposed to be the Ashokan edicts are supposed to be the Ashokan edicts are supposed to be political and imperial in nature. Political and imperial in nature. Ashokan edicts are supposed to be, continue writing in the same paragraph, political and imperial in nature, as through them Ashoka was not only trying to establish, as through them Ashoka was not only trying to establish the legitimacy of his rule, but also to control and regulate some aspects of control and regulate some aspects of the conduct of his subjects. Some aspects of the conduct of his subjects. They are also remarkable for indicating some new approaches in establishing the legitimacy, in the sense that the emperor, here the emperor is Ashoka, the emperor was not relying upon ritualistic legitimacy, like in the later Vedic age, so many sacrifices. So not relying upon ritualistic legitimacy, but instead came to base his legitimacy on some lofty ideals, LOFTY, some lofty ideals or sentiments related to the royal paternalism related to the royal paternalism, paternalistic attitude. I hope you understand this. They are political because legitimacy seeking measures. They are imperial because controlling and regulating the aspects of the conduct of his subjects. Wherever we have control and regulation, we can term those things as imperial. And they are based on new notions. Ashoka is not saying that I am king because I have performed this sacrifice or that sacrifice. If you remember, in the later Vedic age, we find ritualistic justification or search for ritualistic legitimacy, the nexus between the emerging ruling classes and the Brahminical classes, that Raj Suya sacrifice, Aswamedha sacrifice, some other sacrifices, royal sacrifices, grand public sacrifices. Here we have a ruler who for the first time is not relying upon rituals. Rather, he is critical of the rituals and he says that people should obey me the way they obey their father, because I have the same sentiments for them. All subjects are my children and I am concerned about their welfare as I am concerned about the welfare of my own children, and they should look up to me as a father figure. It is something like this. So this was an altogether new basis for legitimacy, new basis for sovereignty in Indian history, and for which Ashoka is given a unique place in Indian history. Uniqueness of Ashoka is found in so many other aspects, but this is also one important aspect. So tomorrow, if there is any question related to Ashoka being a unique emperor in Indian history, we can utilize all these points. So continue now in the resume your writing and continue in the same paragraph. Right? We are proceeding in the same paragraph. At the Ashokan edicts also mark a new beginning in the Indian political history. A new beginning in the Indian political history, in the sense that for the first time, a ruler was attempting or trying to establish direct contact with his subjects, with certain messages meant for the general welfare of his subjects. Seen from this perspective, the Ashokan edicts present the first example of political propaganda. And also exhibit or demonstrate the benevolent character of the Mauryan estate. Benevolent character or welfare character of the estate. All these things are happening for the first time. They can give you statements and they can ask you which statement regarding the Ashokan edicts are correct or incorrect. No? what we are following is, trying to follow is the recent approaches followed by UPSC while asking questions. They are no longer based on which place, which site, but general appreciation of the content, general appreciation of the nature. So, political propaganda also for the first time, benevolent estate also for the first time, that is, this is what we have already written, propaganda, direct contact with the subjects, based on direct contact with the subjects. And then fifth one is benevolent estate. That is also reflected here in the Ashokan edicts. Now keep on writing in the same. Right, in the Ashokan edicts, we also notice reformist zeal, as he was critical, as he was quite critical of the rituals, and other superstitious beliefs and practices, Is it okay? So they are also reformist. So now in this paragraph, with the help of some keywords, we have tried to understand the nature of the Ashokan edicts. That they are political, they are imperial, they are paternalistic, they are examples of political propaganda, they are devices to establish direct contact with the people, they are expressive of or expressions of the benevolent character of the state, and they also display the reformist zeal of the emperor. Now the way they are asking questions, let me tell you that in cultural section they can ask you questions related to the reformism, Indian reformism. And when we talk about Indian reformism, we can go back to the ancient days. That how Indian reformism has been conceptualized, what are the tendencies which have been perceived as evils, what are the approaches which our reformers have followed from time to time. So let me tell you very clearly that when we have emergence of Vedanta philosophy in the later Vedic age, that was also reformist, because that was a criticism of what we can say, the Brahminical orthodoxy. And when we have Buddha and Mahavira in the 6th century BC, along with some other heterodox teachers or preachers, we say that the 6th century BC was an age of reform. So even Buddha was a reformer, Mahavira was also a reformer. Likewise, this emperor Ashoka is also a reformer. And this way we can come down to the modern age. In the medieval age, we have some thinkers, some philosophers like Kabir, Nanak. Don't you think they were reformers? In the 19th century, we have Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Swami Dayanand, Saraswati. They are also reformers. So Indian reformism from ancient to modern age is characterized by certain tendencies, and those tendencies are also displayed by this ancient emperor Ashoka, particularly what we can say in his edicts. And that's why reformist character of Ashokan edicts are very important. Is it okay? Nowadays they are asking questions on long-term historical tendencies. Is it okay? So here we have established the nature of the Ashokan edicts. This is the nature of the Ashokan edicts. Now if there is any question related to the significance of Ashokan edicts, what to write about them? Now like any literary piece, the significance of any source like Ashokan edict is established mainly on the basis of their capacity to provide us with historical details or the knowledge of past. So what all we are capable of knowing about the past, about the age of the Mauryas on the basis of the Ashokan edicts. Is it okay? And of course they are part of the sources also. So here we can write point-wise certain things after changing paragraph. But I hope you understand the approach. We also understand what we are doing. In the Ashokan edicts, in the first paragraph, we took note of certain details in terms of languages, in terms of scripts. In the second paragraph, we have talked about the nature. In the third paragraph, which is also going to have some points, we are going to talk about the significance of the Ashokan edicts. And on all these three aspects, we can have separate questions. On all these three aspects, we can have separate statements, and examiners can ask you to ascertain their truthfulness. Is it okay? So just change your paragraph and write. The Ashokan edicts are important or significant. The Ashokan edicts are important or significant. For Ashokan edicts are important or significant for the following reasons. For the following reasons. So why are they significant? Can any of you provide me with some answers? Why is this whiteboard important or significant? Why the marker I am using is significant? That is significant not because of the characteristics or the physical features that it is white or it is black or green. So I hope you understand the general idea how to establish the significance. That simply means establish the usefulness, and here usefulness is in terms of providing knowledge about the past. Very simple approach. So we have just seen, if you remember, that with the help of Ashokan edicts we can say that in the Mauryan Empire we have sufficient cultural diversity. We have presence of foreigners in some parts of the Indian subcontinent, and that's why we have bilingual edicts. That's why we have use of foreign languages and foreign scripts. Likewise, is it okay? So how to establish the significance? We are so write the first point here. We have already written the following reasons. At the Ashokan edicts help us. The Ashokan edicts, particularly, this we write, the Ashokan edicts, or particularly the major rock edicts, usually found in border areas, BORDER, in border areas, help us in determining the territorial extent of the Mauryan Empire. Territorial extent of the Maurya Empire. Territorial extent of the Maurya Empire. They have been found, keep on writing in the same point, they have been found in almost all parts of the subcontinent. They have been found in almost all parts of the subcontinent, almost all parts of the subcontinent, except the extreme south, except the extreme south and the northeastern regions, except the extreme south and the northeastern regions. Northeastern regions. Very simple understanding. So if the question is in PT, I hope you understand why these points can be used in asking questions in PT. That which of the following areas were not part of the Mauryan Empire? So naturally, all those areas in which we do not find Ashokan edicts are supposed to have been outside the Mauryan influence, and so also outside the extent of the empire. Is it okay? So extreme south and northeastern areas. These two areas were not part of the Mauryan Empire. Otherwise, we have discovered Ashokan edicts even from areas beyond the natural boundaries of the Indian subcontinent. That is in southeastern Afghanistan, Mansehra, Shahbazgadi. These are the places. Is it okay? So the territorial extent, the vast territorial extent of the Mauryan Empire has been largely reconstructed on the basis of the location of the Ashokan edicts. I hope you understand the significance. Meanwhile, Rawa is saying something very good. Northwestern extent territory is found. Mansi is saying for information about the past. Very good approaches. Is it okay? That's why they are important. But this is the first reason. Now the second you write. Right? They reflect. Second point. They reflect the prevailing cultural diversities of the Mauryan Empire. They reflect the prevailing cultural diversities of the empire. Cultural diversity is very important attribute of any imperial machinery. And this point already I have explained earlier, so no need to explain it. Let us move to the third point now. Third point you write. Since they have been found mostly along the major trade routes or routes, R-O-U-T-E-S, since they have been found mostly along the major trade routes of the time and near major settlements of the time, settlements of different types, and near major settlements of the time, they help us in reconstructing not only the economic history, but also in reconstructing some aspects of the demographic history of the time, some aspects of the demographic history of the time, that is population distribution, which areas were populated, the more thickly populated, more sparsely populated areas, those areas can be easily identified. Is it okay? Then right. Next point. They also throw light on they also throw light on Ashokan edicts. Also, next point you are writing, they also throw light on the life of tribal groups, because they are referred to life of tribal groups and the forest people and the forest people and their interaction with the more settled agriculturalists and their interaction with the more settled agriculturalists of the time. Agriculturalists of the time. In this context, keep on writing in the same. In this context, we find references to different tribal groups and their ecological surroundings. References to different tribal groups and their ecological surroundings and subsistence patterns. Ecological surroundings and subsistence patterns. Ecological surroundings and subsistence patterns. Then write the next life. Next. At the Ashokan edicts, by making references to the Ashokan edicts, by making references to the Ashokan edicts, by making references to some of the earliest political powers of the South, some of the earliest political powers of the South, like the Cholas, Pandyas, Keral Putriyas, Satputriyas. The Ashokan edicts, by making references to some of the earliest political powers of the South, that is extreme South, such as written on the board Cholas, Pandyas, Keral Putriyas, Satputriyas, throw light on the process of primary estate formation. Throw light on the process of primary estate formation. Process of primary estate formation in the extreme South. Extreme South. In this context, we can also infer, INFER. In this context, we can also infer increasing cultural contacts, increasing cultural contacts between the North and the South, that is North India and the South India. Increasing cultural contacts between the North and the South. Is it okay? Then write next point. In the Ashokan edicts, we can also have some glimpses of the foreign policy some glimpses of the foreign policy of the Mauryas. Foreign policy of the Mauryas. Foreign policy of the Mauryas, which is also seen as the beginning, which is also seen as the beginning of the Indian foreign policy. Beginning of the Indian foreign policy in terms of both principles and practices. In terms of both principles and practices. In terms of both principles and practices. How? Keep on writing. In this context, in the Ashokan edicts, we not only find the mention of South Indian powers, but also the mention of the Greek rulers of Greek rulers of the West Asian and even African regions. Greek rulers of the West Asian and even African rulers like Egyptian, that area, even African rulers. And the measures adopted by Ashoka in their territories, very interesting, measures adopted by Ashoka in their territories, as a part of his policy of Dhamma. You must have heard of this policy. As a part of his policy of Dhamma. Right, these measures included planting trees, medicinal herbs and plants, medicinal herbs and plants, digging wells, and opening hospitals, for both men and animals. Opening hospitals for both men and animals. Opening hospitals for both men and animals. Let's stop here. I have just made a reference to the Indian foreign policy. The way UPSC is asking questions, we all understand that the questions are becoming interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary day by day. So if the question is something like this, that despite all pragmatic or practical changes, Indian foreign policy is still deeply rooted in Indian civilizational values. This is the question. Now don't you think that this question and its answer requires knowledge of so many things. Knowledge of Indian culture, knowledge of Indian history, knowledge of the history of Mauryas particularly, our modern pragmatic considerations which are particularly related to economic life or economic imperatives. I'm just trying to impress upon you that how questions are being framed. So in what way the Mauryan foreign policy can be seen as the beginning of the Indian foreign policy, not only in terms of principles but also in terms of practices. So we have just seen that Ashoka is not only mentioning the foreign powers of the south and foreign powers of the West Asian areas, but he is also mentioning what measures he has taken in regard to their territories, not in regard to the Ashokan territories, but even in regard to their territories. And whatever measures he has taken are supposed to have been inspired by his policy of Dhamma. It means Dhamma, we are going to talk about it, was not only part of internal consolidation, it was also part of the external consolidation of the Mauryan Empire. So, what is the essence of Indian foreign policy even today, despite all changes? Don't you think that Indian foreign policy still relies upon Panchsheel? And if you talk about the essence of Panchasheel, that is nothing but peaceful coexistence. Is it okay? And when we analyze the principles of Dhamma as propounded by the Emperor Ashoka, what we find is that even the essence of his principle of Dhamma is nothing but peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence of political powers, peaceful coexistence of different social groups. And even today, Indian foreign policy stands for the same thing, that is peaceful coexistence, basically as part of the doctrine of Panchasheel. Is it okay? So, if we trace the civilizational values, we can go back to the time of the Mauryas, we can highlight the elements of Dhamma, and that is generally supposed to be the beginning of Indian foreign policy. How in terms of practices? You must have heard of Gujarat doctrine. What is Gujarat doctrine in Indian foreign policy? That is giving unilateral favor to your neighbors without expecting anything in return. What Ashoka is doing? Ashoka is planting trees. Ashoka is opening hospitals for both men and animals in the territories of the neighboring kingdoms, Greek kingdoms, South Indian kingdoms. Is it okay? To what extent his intentions were translated into reality? To what extent they contain grains of truth? These are immaterial. Even if those things are simply expressions of intent, they are going to be important, because talking like this, behaving like this is something that is very unique, and we can draw modern parallels, and we can find even today that we follow to some extent Gujarat doctrine, in which we try to give unilateral favors to our neighbors as a part of our general obligations or responsibilities towards them without expecting anything in return. So if this question is there, Indian foreign policy is deeply rooted in Indian civilizational norms and values. Indian foreign policy, despite all major changes which we have seen of late, particularly in terms of erosion of ideological temperament and giving more importance to economic interests or strategic interests, despite all these things, even today, we strive for what we can say peaceful coexistence. And one more thing, we have just celebrated Yoga Day, International Yoga Day. We are aspiring for, or we are Vishwa Guru. Ashoka is talking about Dhamma Vijay. That is nothing but a policy of cultural conquest. Dhamma Vijay. That is conquest not on the basis of military might, not on the basis of diplomacy, but on the basis of good intentions, good faith, on the basis of common concerns. What you must be knowing is called soft power. So if we talk about Ashoka's Dhamma, that is nothing but soft power. We are still striving for the same. So be it peaceful coexistence, be it granting unilateral favors to our neighbors, or be it what we can say, the place of India as Vishwaguru in terms of enhancement of our prestige, in terms of increase in our soft powers, all these elements can be traced back to Ashoka and the Ashokan edicts. I have been informed that notes or slides have been uploaded or shared. There you will find three major headings. One is related to Ashokan edicts, major Ashokan edicts. I have there given you, exactly the words used by Ashoka in his edicts. This way also they are asking questions. Last year they had asked a question, who of the ruler talks like this or has said something like this. So it is not important for you to mug up all those things which are there in the edicts, like major rock edict first, second, third, fourth, fifth. But at least you should familiarize yourself with the nature of content. Is it okay? So that if there is any question like this, who says this or who can say things like this, so for that just have one or two readings and that will be sufficient for you. But there you can notice the claims made by Ashoka, the messages given by Ashoka, the evaluation done by Ashoka of his own policy of Dhamma, and there the new orientation that Ashoka gave to the Mauryan polity in both in its internal and external aspects can also be inferred. Is it okay? So whatever we are writing point wise should be complemented or supplemented by what we can say, whatever I have shared with you in terms of a class notes. Is it okay? I don't know the number of that class notes, but simply class notes on the Mauryan Ashokan edicts. So have you received those class notes? Class notes have been shared. I'm getting feedback. That is Rohit Nandan Dikshit is saying soft power. Then Mansi Jadhav, yes. Then Meenakshi, yes. You people have received. So just you can have a look at the content, the way I have arranged things there. Yes, received, sir. Somewhat changed after Modi ji and Atal ji. Yes, Jaydev, somewhat changed, but the core of Indian foreign policy and our foreign policy imperatives are still not much changed. Is it okay? We have more pragmatic elements, we can say, more practical elements, we can say. And that was quite obvious after the disintegration of USSR. Because now in foreign policy, ideological aspects are not that much important. As part of new liberal global economy, we have to make some necessary ideological adjustments. So this point was related to the Indian foreign policy, and I am happy that you people have received them. And this is one example how we should follow interdisciplinary method, multidisciplinary method. APSC is becoming particularly fond of while asking questions. Okay. So now let us proceed to write the next point. Right, in the Ashokan edicts, particularly in the pillar edicts, particularly in the pillar edicts, we find reflection of the policy of Dhamma, or Dhamma Vijay, the same policy of Dhamma or Dhamma Vijay, as propounded, propagated, and even implemented and evaluated. Propounded, propagated, and even implemented and evaluated by the emperor by the emperor. His policy of Dhamma is characterized by I have given those elements in your class notes also. The policy of Dhamma is characterized by the following elements. Following elements. This is not exhaustive list, but write this piety. This is a mix of so many things, no? This is mix of what we can say liberality, generosity. Please check the spelling. If it is wrong, let me know. Compassion, kindness, compassion, regard, respect, no, so many things. Respect for fellow human beings, elders, brahmanas, shramanas. Second is non-violence. In fact, the major is this one, and all other elements generally emanate from this concept of piety. Non-violence. Third is tolerance. No, there was a debate few years back regarding the nature of Indian culture, whether we are tolerant or not. Ashoka is preaching tolerance. And you must have heard of people like Ashish Nandi and others. These are the thinkers, philosophers, as critics of secularism. They say that in Indian society, peace can be established not by disassociation or delinking of religion from society and politics, but by promoting the traditional values of tolerance, mutual respect, which we find in the Indian subcontinent. Is it okay? So tolerance. Mansi meanwhile is asking, what exactly is Ashokan edicts? Is it written by Ashoka himself? That I don't know. Edicts are inscriptions issued by kings, rulers, royal officers, instructing or guiding, stipulating certain norms for the subjects. That is edict. Edicts were issued by Ashoka, but naturally Ashoka was not the person who wrote them, but of course they are his words, or in these edicts we can find his words, and the person who wrote these edicts or engraved them is mentioned as Ghapad. His name is also mentioned. It is something like this. I am making this painting, and here I am writing my name, Wasim. So below the Ashokan edicts we find signature of this man, Ghapad. But of course Ghapad was not the one who propounded the lofty ideals of Dhamma. It was the emperor himself. Ghapad was just a technician, just a man who inscribed these edicts on the pillars. Is it okay? So tolerance, and then what? Fourth element is, you will find all this where? In your class notes, in which I have given the details of Ashokan edicts. So I am not going to elaborate them. Elaboration you will find as done by emperor himself. Evaluation as done by emperor himself. So here I have nothing much to say. I am just pointing out the major elements on which you have to pay attention. Tolerance, then what? Social reforms. Ashoka is a reformist also. Criticizing practices resorted to by people, particularly women, on occasions like birth, death, marriage, something like this. Ashoka is not happy about them. Ashoka says that they are useless practices and people should abandon them and they should instead focus upon following the principles of Dhamma. Is it okay? So social reforms. Then fifth one is, we can say here, welfare state, welfare of the subjects, paternalism I have just mentioned. So these are the terms we can use while describing the policy of Dhamma of Ashoka. Now there are two important issues here which I would like to discuss. No need to write, just understand. First is, what connection this policy of Dhamma had with Buddhism, and what connection even Ashoka had with Buddhism. So now this is a settled fact that Ashoka followed Buddhism, propagated Buddhism. In one of his edicts, that is Bhabru edict. Is it okay? That is somewhat misprint in your class notes. Bhabra, but that is Bhabru. That is in Rajasthan. In that edict, Ashoka accepts that he is follower of Buddhism. You must have heard of those famous expressions, Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. Bhabru is in Rajasthan. Whether his conversion was a gradual kind of thing or inspired by some sudden events like Kalinga War, these have been historically debatable issues. There is no mention of Kalinga War in Buddhist sources. Buddhist sources explain his conversion in terms of influence of some Buddhist monks, some Buddhist followers. Ashoka himself does not say that it is due to Kalinga War he is converting to Buddhism. He simply says that after this Kalinga War, he is going to follow the policy of Dhamma. But in what way policy of Dhamma is inspired by Buddhism? So see, core is the same. That is, here non-violence is there, Buddhism was also non-violence. We cannot separate principles of Buddhism from Ashoka and from his policy of Dhamma. But Dhamma was not exactly what we can say Buddhism. It was common morality of the time, and it was mainly a public policy that was meant for both internal and external consolidation of the empire. An empire which had already reached the maximum territorial extent after the conquest of Kalinga by Ashoka. After that, it was time for consolidation. And Ashoka paid now attention to consolidation, and for consolidation he relied upon some common values, some what we can say set of norms and values of the time which were common to all the religions and were meant for general well-being of the people. So Ashoka tried to create a common platform. It was also important for him to establish internal peace, because at that time, of course, we find in the Mauryan Empire followers of so many other religions. We have Buddhism, we have Jainism, we have Brahmanism, and the relation between all these sects was not always cordial, because very soon we are going to find Pushyamitra Shunga, and Pushyamitra Shunga followed a policy of persecution of the followers of Buddhism. Whether true or false, that is another issue. But mere fact that in Buddhist sources he is mentioned as a hostile king towards Buddhism indicates that the relations among different religions or followers of different sects in the Mauryan age was not very cordial. But the interest of empire was in internal peace as well as in external peace, and so Ashoka devised this political policy. So our understanding, historical understanding of the policy of Dhamma is that it was a political policy on the part of the emperor. Of course, it was inspired by Buddhism. Ashoka was follower of Buddhism, but it was not entirely Buddhism or political version of Buddhism. It was basically a platform which borrowed elements from different or divergent socio-cultural traditions of the time, and Ashoka was trying to create a common platform for his subjects, and it was part of his larger program of what we can say consolidation of the empire. Is this position clear to all of you? No need to write all these things, just simply understand. He was Dhamma Buddhism? No. not Buddhism, but of course, it was inspired by Buddhism. Ashoka was follower of Buddhism. Yes, he was follower of Buddhism. But the policy of Dhamma that he followed was not exactly what we can say Buddhism, and there was, or we can create some distinction between his personal faith, that was Buddhism, and his public policy, that was the policy of Dhamma. Is this position clear to all of you? Then write the next point. Again we are covering so many topics. We are talking about Ashoka, we are talking about policy of Dhamma. Wider context is the Ashokan edicts. But this is how we have to cover. Is it okay? It is not only about writing the names of rulers and talking about them in terms of what all they did. We have to place what all they did in the wider context in which we find them, and the general implications of their policies, not only for their own time but also for our time. Is it okay? This is more mature kind of understanding of the historical details, which remain, as I told you in the very beginning of this class, same for all the competitive examinations, including one-day competition and SSC and what we can say UPSC, but our treatment is going to be different. Is it okay? Am I clear to all of you? Now write the next point. We are still proceeding in the same, that is significance of the Ashokan edicts. I don't exactly know the number, whether 7th or 8th, but whatever you decide on your own and write it. Right, in the Ashokan edicts, we also find, in the Ashokan edicts, we also find some details related to his personal life, some details related to his personal life, such as his personal names, his personal name, that was what? Ashoka. His personal name, his titles or epithets, like Deva, Nam, Piyadasi or Piyadasi, Raja. So personal name, titles, epithets. His wife, he had many wives, but particularly one is mentioned, his wife Karuvaki. She is mentioned in Allahabad inscription. His wife, his Dhamma Yatras, So Ashoka was a traveler, and he instructed his officers also to travel, to know the conditions of the people. His Dhamma Yatras, etc. So this kind of details also we know about Ashoka in his edicts. Is it okay with everyone? Now write the next point. In the Ashokan edicts, we also find some details. In the Ashokan edicts, we also find some details related to the administration of the empire, of the empire, particularly in terms of names and designations of officials such as pradestries, yuktas, pradestries, yuktas, Dhamma Mahamatas. No, they were special officers appointed by Ashoka to propagate Buddhism, propagate Dhamma. Dhamma Mahamatas, Rajukas, they were judicial officers perhaps. Judicial officers, Rajukas. Spies such as Pativedakas, Pulusanis, spies such as Pativedakas, Pulusanis, etc. And instructions given by the emperor, by the emperor, instructions given by the emperor to them. That they also throw light on the Mauryan taxation system. They also throw light on the Mauryan taxation system. There is a very famous, you will read it in your class notes, inscription, Rumandai inscription. That was the time, that was the place where Buddha was born, Lumbini. Ashoka visited this place, and out of respect for Buddha, he provided some concessions. He reduced it to 1/8 of the total produce. It was not a case of complete waiver. Some relaxation was given. So this you will find in your class notes related to the Ashokan edicts. But judicial officers like Rajukas, local officers like Pradestris, Yuktas, Dhamma Mahamatras are particularly important because they were the special officers appointed. So these are the important details we find in the Ashokan edicts, and that's why Ashokan edicts are important. And all these details are related to the Ashoka. So I hope understand that apparently it appears to be a very small topic, Ashokan edicts, but the way we have covered, we have talked also about so many things related to Ashoka, so many things related to Mauryas. So this completes what we can say, the first dimension, that is archaeological sources for the reconstruction, and what we have reconstructed related to the age of the Mauryas. Now the next was, I am going to do here some repairing works, that this is secular literature, and this is what? Literary sources, no? Literary sources, and then we have foreign accounts. Archaeological, we have just finished. Now if we talk about literary sources, here we have Puranas. Here not much to discuss. Just we can know their approaches. I think even dictation is not required. Is it okay? But you can write in 1 or 2 lines. Just change your paragraph and make now a heading, write literary sources. Literary sources. Simply they can ask you questions like this. Which of the following throw light on the Mauryas? A. Puranas. B. Sangam literature. C. Mahabhashya. D. Ratnavali. So which of the following does not throw light on the Mauryan life, the life of the Mauryas? Of course, Ratnavali. It is something like this. So, write literary sources and then make a subheading the way I have made on the board, religious literature. And write few lines and not separately in one go, right? We find mention of the Maurya rulers. We find mention of the Maurya rulers in Puranas. In Puranas. As a part of their genealogies. Genealogies. It is list of rulers. Genealogies of the ancient ruling dynasties. So Mauryas are part of this. Of the ancient ruling dynasties. Ancient ruling dynasties. The Puranas are quite critical of the dynasty. They don't treat them in good faith, we can say. Quite critical of the dynasty. And they generally assign, ASSIGN, assign a lower social origin. Generally assign a lower social origin to the Mauryas. Lower social origin to the Mauryas. But the dynasty is much celebrated. But the dynasty is much celebrated in the Buddhist religious literature. Much celebrated in the Buddhist religious literature. And the most celebrated king, Mauryan king, and the most celebrated Mauryan king in the Buddhist literature is Ashoka. Ashoka. Right, his achievements and efforts to propagate Buddhism. His achievements and efforts to propagate Buddhism can be found in Sri Lankan chronicles. I hope the spelling is correct. Chronicles, same chronicle. Sri Lankan chronicles such as Deep Vansa and Mahavansa. Deep Vansa and Mahavansa. He is also celebrated in Dibya Avadanas. These are Buddhist literature. Dibya Avadanas. Dibya is what? I hope you understand the something supernatural. Avadanas, stories. Dibya Avadanas. One of which is also known as Ashoka Vadanas. See, a special text on Ashoka. One of them is also called Ashoka Vadanas. Ashoka Vadanas. The dynasty finds mention even in Milinda Panaho. You must have heard of Milinda Panaho. In the Milinda Panaho, that is Questions of Menander. Milinda Panaho. At the Jaina religious literature are quite favorably disposed. The Jaina religious literature is quite favorably disposed towards the founder of the dynasty, Chandragupta Maurya mentioned as a follower of Jainism. You must have heard of those stories related to the great famine in Magad, forcing the king to abdicate his throne and proceed to the south along with his spiritual mentor Bhadrabahu, the founder of Digambara sect of Jainism. So all those stories, though not in contemporary sources, but in later sources we find that Chandragupta Maurya is much celebrated a figure in the Jaina religious literature. Is it okay? So this much about what we can say, the different parts of the religious literature in which we have mention of the Mauryas. Is it okay? Now make another subheading, right? Secular literature. Secular literature. So right. As written on the board, we have in the Sangam literature, in which we also find mention of the Nandas. So north south much closely connected by this time. So right in the Sangam literature, a poet Mamul Nar, this name is important. A poet Mamul Nar has particularly in the Sangam literature, a poet Mamul Nar has particularly mentioned, particularly mentioned, mentioned the Mauryas, the Mauryas, their political allies in the south, Mauryas, their political allies in the south, and even their military operations, even their military operations, no, their chariots, their horses, their soldiers, no, everything. Mamulnar, this poet of Sangam literature. Sangam literature is, in literature section of your culture, you will understand that there is a body or corpus of literature called Sangam literature, marking the beginning of what we can say the historical phase in the South India. Is it okay? Then right, in the Mahabhasya of Patanjali, in the Mahabhasya, keep on writing, of Patanjali, in the Mahabhashya of Patanjali, which is a famous work on Sanskrit grammar, which is a famous work on Sanskrit grammar, in bracket write 2nd century BC, 2nd century BC, we find mention of the Mauryas, particularly of the founder of the dynasty. We know the founder, Chandragupta Maurya, particularly of the founder of the dynasty, Chandragupta Maurya. The famous work, keep on writing in the same, the famous work of Vishakh Datta Mudra Rakshas, I have written it here. The famous work of Vishakh Datta Mudra Rakshas, in bracket write 5th century AD. The famous work of Vishakh Datta Mudra Rakshas, in bracket 5th century AD, no, Gupta age, is particularly known for throwing light on, particularly known for throwing light on the relationship between Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya. Relationship between Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya. Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya. But the most celebrated work throwing light on the history of Mauryas, is the Arth Shastra, Full stop. The class is over. Tomorrow we are going to continue with the Arth Shastra, Indica and other dimensions of the Mauryan rule. Meanwhile, let me tell you that you must have heard of that famous story that how a humiliated Brahman, Chanakya, humiliated by the last of the Nanda ruler, Dhanananda, a dynasty which is mentioned as a Shudra dynasty, was trying to seek revenge, and he spotted this talented boy, Chandragupta, took him to Takshashila, trained him in the art of military administration, politics, and with the help of the same boy was capable of overthrowing the Shudra dynasty. And Chandragupta, that young boy, now became founder of the Mauryan dynasty. This whole story is for the first time mentioned in the Mudra Rakshas of Bishakdat, not before that. Is it okay? We precisely, exactly don't know, the, historically speaking, connection, but many legends are there, many references in the later works are also there, which establish connection between Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya. Is it okay? So in the next class, I think that is tomorrow itself, we are going to talk about Arthashastra, Chanakya and other dimensions. Thank you so much for this cooperation.